Michael Arria. He'll be talking about the context around how mainstream media covers Gaza activism and Trump's crackdown on it. Michael is Mondoweiss' U.S. correspondent. He produces The Shift, tracking U.S. politics and Palestine, and Power Pushback, covering the Palestine movement and the repression of Palestine activism. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to all the other panelists and people for tuning in. I thought Jesse's analysis was great and kind of provided like a good segue for what I'm about to talk about. I was kind of reflecting on this idea of media literacy. It was kind of thinking about the times where mainstream media actually does cover the story, because I think we've seen that recently. I mean, genocide has been going on for so long. This week I saw, like Piers Morgan, I don't know, officially came out against it or made some comments to that effect. We're seeing a lot of people kind of finally come to this conclusion, and inevitably it develops this kind of space where we actually see some good mainstream reporting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that context and how, alternative media, indie media is so important to kind of inform that mainstream reporting. I'm thinking in particular, recently there was a really good piece, I thought, a comprehensive piece in the New York Times about Project Esther. And this is a proposal that was developed by the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, to kind of counter the Palestine movement in the US. They frame it as countering anti-Semitism. If you look at the kind of details, it's exactly what's happening under Trump. It's this plan to deport international students, purge pro-Palestine faculty from schools, to fund organizations that support Palestine, and really to use anti-terror laws in order to kind of stifle dissent. I thought it was a really good piece, but, Project Esther was developed in October of 2024. A lot of sites like, our site, Dropsite News, Intercept, a lot of places that Common Dreams, places that we have already been identified tonight have been covering Project Esther for quite some time, and also covering the kind of wider context, what leads up to something like Project Esther, which is, years of these anti-BDS laws, these attempts to, codify the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which conflates some, criticisms of Israel as anti-Semitic. So it's like, even though the New York Times has got on this and it's good, and they actually did a recent piece too, I thought that was pretty good, about Canary Mission, the group that, targets students and doxes them and tries to, prevent them from getting employment. But a lot of this stuff has been around for quite a while. And I think another kind of great recent example of this phenomenon, was earlier this year when 60 Minutes did, again, what I thought was a really good report on Gaza and the U.S. connection to it. And, they had a story where at the beginning you see kids kind of playing with, like ammunition casings in Gaza, kind of kicking them around. And then, the narrator of that story, I think it was Cecilia Vega, goes on to tell viewers that the ammunition casings that they're seeing were produced in the United States. And the segment goes on to interview a bunch of State Department officials who quit the Biden administration over the genocide. A real historic number of people did that. I think, we didn't see anything comparable during, say, like the Obama administration, during, like the drone program or anything. But the thing about that story is that the footage that they took of the kids was from May. And, the people that they interviewed, virtually all of them had quit their positions months before the segment ran. Some of them quit their positions, a full year plus before the segment ran. And they're running the segment after the election had already happened. So Trump is about, I think, a week from going into the White House at that point. And they're telling you, this is how the Biden administration is essentially complicit in this carnage in Gaza. But it's no longer having the effect that it would have potentially if they were running the piece while the people, these people were still in power. And that came just a couple weeks after 60 Minutes did a segment, I think, all but kind of like celebrating the pager attacks on Lebanon that Israel carried out, which killed a number of civilians, including a young child. So I just think even when the mainstream gets these things right, we're kind of lacking that context, or the timing is kind of suspicious on that level. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention, and something I think about a lot, have been thinking about a lot just because I cover this group a lot in my work, is the way that the Anti-Defamation League is handled by the mainstream media. which is an organization which obviously has like a deep problematic history, and people can, go online and read about it. There's a number of activists who have been pushing for quite some time for nonprofits and human rights groups to sever their ties to the organization based on their behavior. But I'd say in recent years, it's gotten even worse. There used to be a part of the ADL's FAQ session, if you went on their website, that explicitly said that not all forms of anti-Zionism are anti-Semitism. And I've quoted that a couple times, and I went to link to it the other day, about 3 weeks ago, and I realized that I had to use the Wayback Machine to bring it up because they had scrubbed it from their website, which it just shows that the group has gotten even more extreme with Jonathan Greenblatt at the helm. And, Jonathan Greenblatt is consistently invited on, mainstream channels every year. The ADL puts out this audit, this anti-Semitism audit, which alleges that anti-Semitism is skyrocketing or hit some all-time high. I think the last one that came out claimed anti-Semitic incidents have gone up by something like 500% in the last decade, which is obviously a staggering statistic to hear, and would understandably, make people concerned and nervous. Jonathan Greenblatt, when he goes on these shows, whenever this audit comes out, he goes on CNN and MSNBC and talks about these things. He's never confronted about the methodology for that report. And if you look at that report, the ADL counts anything, criticisms of Israel, criticisms of Zionism, in the same way that they count actual anti-Semitic incidents. So students chanting from the river to the sea, or, professors holding a panel that references the Intifada, that is equated in this audit the same way that, literal Nazis going into a cemetery and desecrating, tombstones with swastikas is. And, he's never challenged on that. And we see now that conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is kind of being used as a basis to try to detain and deport people in this country. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said it essentially many times, that the reason why they're attacking students is because they claim that, pro-Gaza protest is anti-Semitic, and anti-Semitism is antithetical to the U.S.'s foreign policy. So it's a very important subject, I think. And he's never challenged in any way whatsoever. He's brought on consistently, and the group is cited consistently as a civil rights organization, despite the fact that he was recently asked on CNN what he thought about Trump, scooping up students off the street and kidnapping them and detaining them. And Jonathan Greenblatt said that the ADL wasn't concerned with what he termed as Hamasniks, that wasn't their job to protect people like that. So this is a group that I think is obviously much more concerned with protecting Israel than it is with documenting anti-Semitism or combating it in any way. There was a big pro-Israel rally shortly after the bombing began in 2023. Jonathan Greenblatt was invited on MSNBC to talk about that rally. I think 25,000 people showed up. He said that close to 300,000 people showed up. He wasn't challenged on that at all. He wasn't asked about the fact that Van Jones was booed when he, said something in his speech during the rally to the effect of wanting peace in the region. People screamed no ceasefire at him. And he wasn't asked why anti-Semitic pastor John Hagee was a speaker at that event, a guy who has said that Jewish people brought the Holocaust upon themselves by disobeying God, a guy who says that the Antichrist will come back to earth as a Jew. This was a person who the ADL, which ostensibly is here to, exist to combat anti-Semitism, invited to this rally, and they have to face no questions about it. So I think, if somebody's watching a cable news station, they might get a report on, Mahmoud Khalil, or one of the many students who's been detained. They might get a report on, the Trump administration shredding the Constitution in the name of alleged, combating of anti-Semitism. But then shortly after that, they might see Jonathan Greenblatt on their television kind of telling them that, spitting out these staggering numbers and kind of suggesting that, campuses are out of control and they need to be reeled in. So I think even when the mainstream media gets these questions right or does good reporting, I would just, end by kind of echoing what's been said quite a bit already on this panel, which it just, I think, underscores and highlights the need for independent media, alternative media, and we're just calling people to support those type of media and those type of organizations that have been telling the story for quite a long time, whether it hits the mainstream or not.
Thank you so much, Michael. A couple quick questions for you. Talking about the ADL a lot there. To me, the ADL seems, or maybe it's to normies who aren't like deep into this stuff, the ADL almost seems like an official thing. Like they are the decider on what's racist to a lot of people. And they, from what I remember, they didn't think Elon's Nazi salute was problematic.
Yep.
Which is why, like, they blamed it on, well, he's on the spectrum, and this is, it's very weird. Do you think the ADL is losing, I don't know if support, trust, I guess, in media at all from this? Because it's been comical in how they've treated things. Do you think that their stance is lessening any?
I'm not sure it's lessening among media. I think it is lessening among kind of activists, progressives, people who are kind of pay close attention to media. There's a campaign called Drop the ADL. I'd encourage people to check it out, which has a lot of great information about what the organization actually does. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but kind of calls on people to sever ties with it. I should have mentioned the Elon Musk thing. You're absolutely right. I think that is another example of how that group all but ignores, real actual anti-Semitism on the right, while going at the left, obviously, for the crime of supporting Palestine. And I think the sad thing is we don't actually have a group that documents anti-Semitism. It's not a group that can be taken seriously, insofar as we connect the struggle against anti-Semitism with the struggle against Islamophobia or anything else. It's sad that the one group that's kind of looked at to do that cannot be trusted in any capacity.
And one quick question from the chat: is J Street better than the ADL in this regard? I would say to some degree, yeah.
Yeah, I would say to some degree, yeah. I mean, J Street, I mean, that's kind of a loaded question. They're obviously like a liberal Zionist organization. It took them, I think, 100 days to come out and oppose the genocide. Initially, when it first started, they were threatening to pull support or potentially back primaries for lawmakers who supported a ceasefire. So it's just something to keep in mind when we think about J Street.
Yeah, Norman Solomon from RootsAction had a great piece. Has J Street gone along with genocide from March? So he's written about that. I urge you to check that out. Okay. Michael, one last thing. If students can be removed for fake anti-Semitism, what type of journalists can colleges even produce?
That's a really good question. I think there's a much deeper question here, which we don't have time for, which is just we're getting to a point where what is the function of the university system in this country,
Right.
if they're going to just cower to what the Trump administration says. And I think we're really we've seen student journalists get suspended in the same way that we've seen activists get suspended. So I think it's a deep and important question, certainly.